I don't have time to preach on everything today, so I'm not going to address Abraham and Isaac, because I want to talk about Romans. But I can tell you, if you go to our Good Sam channel and you look at Ken and Gwen Lynch's sermon 3 years ago, it's an excellent interpretation that I never would have thought of, and I encourage you to go find that sermon and listen to it if you want to know why there's a Bible passage in which God asks a man to kill his son. I want to talk about Romans, because that also is a heavy-duty reading, with the word sin appearing, sin, 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 obedience, obedience, enslavement, enslavement, enslavement. It's a very hard reading to listen to. So I want to introduce it by talking to you about my Aunt Yoonju. My uncle Stan served in the American Army in Korea and met a woman named Yoonju and married her and brought his bride back to San Francisco. And Yoonju was very excited to be an American and to live in the United States of America. So it's interesting to consider what she thought about freedom as we think about July 4th and our Independence Day. Korea is a place with far more regulation, especially during wartime. She was constantly bound and not able to do things. And so when she got to California, she just thought, freedom! And that meant doing whatever she wanted whenever she wanted, including when the sign said don't walk, she would just walk across an intersection, cross streets whenever she wanted, even when cars were coming, because she was free. And my American-born, English-speaking grandmother said, "What are you doing?" Trying to orient her to the United States. And she said, "I can do whatever I want. It's the United States of America. I am free." Well, that's not what freedom means, is it? That freedom doesn't really mean doing whatever you want. And yet, Paul has all this language about enslavement and obedience. And the word enslavement has so many historical echoes in our country that make it hard to listen to. You might be interested to know that the word had that heaviness and that weight to it to Paul as well, and that he's doing it intentionally, according to historical experts and people who are experts on Paul. So, first of all, I'm going to take you through this line by line because there's so much and it's so confusing that if we don't, we won't really be able to follow it. He starts with, "Therefore, do not let sin exercise dominion in your mortal bodies to make you obey their passions. No longer present your members to sin as instruments of wickedness, but present yourselves to God," etc., etc. There has been a tendency in the past, I would say, probably among the Puritans and so in the United States, to interpret sin here primarily when they hear members and presenting your moral bodies as referring only to sexual sin. That is not the case. It's referring to all kinds of sin, that the mortal body includes our minds, our hands, our mouths. It's what we say, it's what we think, it's what we've done to others, all sorts of things we've done to others. And the way I know that is that the sin that Paul confessed so often and felt so bad about was executing followers of Jesus. That was his great sin, that he did not recognize Jesus as the Messiah at first. So, wipe that knowledge, that picture you have in your head when he's talking about your body obeying its passion. It could be gluttony, it could be anger, it could be impatience, it could be whatever. Okay, then he goes back to the theme of last week when he says, "Sin will no longer have dominion over you since you are not under law, but under grace." What then? Should we sin because we are not under law, but under grace? By no means. See, you all know it. You know this letter. Of course not. It's a ridiculous thought to think, well, no, because Christ has saved me through his sacrifice, I can do whatever I want. That's the Yoonju. That's my Aunt Yoonju's argument. I'm free. Not really. You are instead enslaved to God. So let's talk about enslavement and what it meant for Paul. In Paul's time, one could be enslaved forcefully. Usually that would happen like people and soldiers who were conquered by other peoples. They would be slaves, actually. They might be well treated, but they were nevertheless forced to enter slavery. But then there were people who chose to become enslaved, like we called them indentured servants, but really slaves. They gave up their freedom, they gave up their legal freedoms, they gave up some of their rights, they agreed to be enslaved to somebody to survive. And they often brought their families into this arrangement with them. So they would get a roof over their head, they would get money, some people could save and buy their way out of slavery eventually. But it has some of the ramifications that we think of enslavement in the United States, which was that you couldn't do whatever you wanted. You absolutely had to obey the master. They could kill you, they could harm you physically, they could do all sorts of things to you as long as you were enslaved. So, to his audience at the time, the word enslaved has the same weight and danger to it that it has to us. So why would he say enslaved to God? It's a strange way. He says that yous have, having once been slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the form of teaching to which you were entrusted. And you have been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. Then he says, I am speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations, because you don't perceive God very well. That's your natural limitations, because we don't really get it. He's using a metaphor that we understand. You have been enslaved by sin. It has taken you over. It has controlled your mind and your body, and now you're free from that. But now you have to turn your heart and your mind to letting something else take over your heart and your mind and your body, as if you were enslaved. So he's using that metaphor. But I don't know about you, if you say you are a slave to God, do whatever God says, that doesn't exactly make me say, yay, I am a follower of God. It doesn't feel like a positive way of thinking about following God. But notice he says, I'm going to repeat it again, you have become obedient from the heart to the form of teaching to which you were entrusted. And the word used there, the heart, where is it? The heart to the form of teaching. The word is typos, type, form. In other words, model. You're following a model of teaching that has been given to you. And that is why when the staff and I were discussing the reading from Matthew that I sent out to all of you for a Bible reflection this week, it talks about if you serve a prophet, who comes from a prophet in the prophet's name, you will be blessed. If you give a disciple something who is a follower of Jesus, who is himself a follower of God, you will be blessed, and so on. It's referring to our following types, having a heritage of prophets, having a heritage of teachers, having a heritage of believers before us who have shown us how to do it. And it's those people who inspire us. They provide the models of teaching in addition to the Bible and the life of Jesus, right? Why are you good? Why do you choose a life of righteousness? Is it because God said so? Is that the only reason? That's not a bad reason. That is a pretty decent reason. But I think most of us instead have been inspired by holy people who went before us, whether they were grandparents or parents or teachers or saints, spiritual leaders, coaches, bosses, a lot of friends. A lot of us have had a variety of influences in our life. The first person I always think of is my grandmother on the Italian side, not the one who was yelling at Yunju, but the other one, who was the epitome of patience. She had 4 children and many grandchildren. I think it's about, 15 grandchildren. And always over her house, always bustling, always making messes, doing everything. And she was just the picture of patience. And throughout my life, whenever I needed more patience, when I felt impatient, she always pops up in my head as the model, the picture of what I am supposed to be like. And it makes me want to be obedient to the picture of patience. Does that make sense? So he's saying enslavement because he wants to say, tie yourself so much to that God and that righteousness that you're just going to do whatever you're called by God to do, as if you have to save your life, even though God has saved it. I think of another illustration of this. When I was 11, tween, When I was 11, I was at home, I think alone with my mother, and I probably was playing the piano or watching TV or reading a book or something. I wasn't doing any chore, but my mother had washed laundry for 7 people. 7 people. There was a mountain of laundry on the dining table, just a mountain. And my mother was folding, and then she said, in a very sweet voice, "Janine, would you please put the laundry away?" And I said, "Well, are you asking me or telling me? Because if you're asking me, then no." I was 11, what can I say? And she turned and she said, "If you want me to order you, I will." That's how she handled it. "If you want me to order you, I will." And I thought, I don't, actually. So I'm going to put the laundry away. And as I was putting the laundry away, I thought, what a lousy thing to say. She said it so nicely. And actually, I appreciated her saying it nicely. And granted, I was teasing. I figured she meant, put it away. But I was so used to my parents saying, pick up your clothes, do your homework, go to school, go to bed, wash the dishes, mow the lawn. I was used to order. And when I got that nice way, I thought, well, let's see if I can get out of it. So the desired thing was obedience, right? But my mother didn't want to make me feel like a slave about it. She wanted me to want it. Now, think about God. Can you imagine saying to God, "Are you asking me or telling me, God? Because if you're asking me, I don't really feel like doing it, so I'm not going to." And how would God respond to that? God doesn't want us to be actual slaves just saying, "I'm only going to follow God because I have to." No, God wants us to delight in God's will and walk in God's ways. Amen.